I mean, we joke about diversity in my lab, but my lab is all women. So not diverse on at least that axis. Probably has something to do with our focus on women's health. But we are diverse in terms of the kind of socioeconomic background of people in the lab. We have women of color, we have, geographic diversity, but there's always room to do better. And it's something that, I try to really think deeply about when recruiting people into the lab is, what new perspectives can they bring? What new backgrounds do they have? And I think that's ultimately the strongest case for diversity, right? Is not just that it's a social justice issue, that it's like the right thing to do, but I think the argument is even more powerful than that, that having diversity makes our science better, right? Full stop. And, there's been people who've systematically studied this, not just in the sciences, but in the business world and other domains, that more diverse teams create, more innovative ideas, better outcomes. And I think that is absolutely true in the sciences, because at some basic level, you can't answer questions you don't see. And we all bring a different lens, a different set of eyes, a different set of experiences to the table. And those are going to shape the kinds of questions that you ask as a scientist, the kinds of ways in which you approach a scientific problem. It's a hard one to answer because I'm an N of one. And as you say in your question, a lot of these biases can be implicit. So they're hard to put a finger on. It's hard to know, like, oh, did I not get that thing, that grant or that award or that position because, I'm not good enough, or there's somebody better, or was it something to do with, it's hard to know at the individual level. I've had a couple instances where the explicit bias really did kind of rear its head, which was so surprising to me. Because it felt like maybe I'd sort of skated through, and at least in my mind, felt like I hadn't faced so many biases, although again, it's hard to name them if we can't really see them. When my husband and I, he's also a neuroscientist, and we went on the market together to get a job in faculty positions. And we were, very lucky to have options. I think we had narrowed it down to like 3 or 4 places that were interested in making us both an offer, and then did. And at 3 of those places, the offers were identical, but at one place, he was offered a higher starting salary. And that was a surprise. Like, it didn't feel like anything on paper felt that different to me. And then, we were given the piece of paper to sign, and we were like, why is his salary higher? So that was one instance where it really did, and as soon as we pointed it out, the university kind of like fixed it, right, really quickly. But it was interesting that it did happen. And then your point to, students dealing with imposter syndrome, just know that it is real, and it happens to everybody, and it happens throughout your career. And so you're not alone. And science is hard. And when things are hard, you can start to sort of doubt yourself. But just understand that everybody is feeling the same way. And if they're not, they're probably just faking it. And deep down, they probably are. In the lab, and I got experience doing sort of basics in brain imaging. And that really just kind of solidified the fact that I don't just love studying about learning about the brain in 4 walls of a classroom. I really love the kind of hands-on, design studies, collect data, the reporting. Like, I love the whole enterprise of science, and I wanted to get to do it. And that really kind of set me up. And again, just to go back to this, it was so powerful for me to have an undergrad experience that was marked by being in an all-women's college. And I guess I was just sort of ignorant at the time, but like in applying for colleges, I didn't sort of think about being a woman in STEM at an all women's college. I mean, I should have like chosen Smith for that reason, but I just chose it because I liked it for a lot of other reasons. But in retrospect, it was such an asset to forge relationships with women that was not purely social, but in some ways purely intellectual, right? To have people that were kind of like intellectual sparring partners, and that, independent of sort of anything else. That was such a gift. And I went off to, I did a like visiting undergraduate student semester at Harvard, in part because at that time the neurosciences at Smith were a little bit more leaned toward cellular molecular neuroscience, and I knew kind of halfway through that I was more oriented toward like human cognitive neuroscience, which was less well represented at that time. And so I went to Cambridge to get some higher upper division classes in more cog neuro. And then that was the first time that, of course, there were men around, and you really see like all the things that you hear about, in a classroom, like the men kind of like putting their hand in the air, and the women, like those sort of gender dynamics really played out for me. And yeah, I like had this different vantage point on it. I had this lens of like already knowing my worth, already knowing that like I was good at science, I deserved to be in this room, like I'm just as smart as everybody else. And I think that gave me, a sense of confidence, a sense of sort of my place, and ultimately helped that experience. And we have another project looking at oral contraceptives in the brain. This is part of a big database that we're forming called the University of California Women's Brain Initiative, in collaboration with my talented postdoc, Caitlin Taylor. And we wanted to ask this question of, OCs suppress our body's endogenous production of steroid hormones. Does that have an effect on the brain? And that was a question that, to be honest, I was not sure I really wanted to be a part of answering, because again, sort of going back as this, feminist, as somebody who was very strongly supportive of women's, reproductive choices, and having access to birth control is such a critical part of that. It, historically gave women economic independence. It gave us the right to choose when we were going to have a child and still be able to have sex. I was worried that by suddenly like putting OC under the lens of neuroscience, it didn't matter what we would find, that if we found anything, that those results could be weaponized to say, here's why the pill's bad. And, maybe nefarious groups would use that to try to defund Planned Parenthood. And, in today's era, like it's already so tenuous, those protections, especially with, the recent news around the Supreme Court. So I was really wary about answering that question. And that lasted like an hour. And then I realized that, ignorance is not going to help us here. And and I would encourage all of you and all of the neuroscience majors to watch. There's this beautiful op doc in the New York Times by this filmmaker named Cinda Aga, and it's called Birth Control Your Own Adventure. Maybe we can even like put up the little URL link for people to watch, because it's about her experience on birth control. And I'll let you watch it, but one of my favorite kind of pull quotes from that is, and I'm gonna just sort of paraphrase this, but she basically says, American public discourse cannot handle nuance well. On the one hand, I deserve birth control. And on the other hand, I deserve better birth control. And those two statements can be true at the same time. And it was that thinking that led me to this idea that we should study this, because, 100 million women around the world, 10 million women right here in the United States are taking some form of hormonal birth control. And yet there has been no systematic study to understand how it might affect or not the brain. And we should understand that so that we can both fiercely defend our right to these things, but also use that knowledge to develop safe, the safest and most effective forms of birth control, right? We just need to know.